I was actually going to wear a t-shirt, and I see everyone's got button-up shirts. I thought
Don't worry, bro. Stay.
So I went to golf shirt, but
stay in your authentic. Look at the facilitator.
Golf shirt's a good choice, promise.
Yeah. Matt, that is a magic cup. It disappears as you move it around on the background.
Yeah,
he's hiding a swimming pool there, sitting out by the pool there.
you're all live, by the way, so you might want to keep quiet.
Hey, welcome back, Delane. Oh, Ashley,
Welcome, everyone.
one
of the things we can do right under lockdown is to start things on time. So it is exactly 4 p.m. and I want to welcome all of you guys to this amazing opportunity we have to discuss what are really very important things. And to anybody who's watching on the live stream, thank you for taking the time to join us on the live stream. We are really excited to be able to have this very esteemed panel. I'm actually in shock because, you know, the one thing I can say for this lockdown is if I'd been asked to gather these business leaders into one meeting at such short notice in any time before, that would never have happened. So there are some blessings in the lockdown, and it really is a privilege to have the leaders we've got here. We really have a diverse set of executives who are going to share with us what we've entitled Lessons in Lockdown. It's really the response of these business leaders and their businesses to this incredible, unprecedented crisis of the COVID-19 that we're experiencing at the moment. I mean, just as a preamble, you don't need me to tell you just how unprecedented these events that we're experiencing really are. I was reading JP Morgan said that their view is that the global economy is going to have contracted by between 4 and 8% contracted for the first quarter of this year. And that's before we see the further impact of what's going on with the economy. And although this is a health crisis, we know that it's business and economy that's going to actually be impacted in the long term. We've seen unemployment figures from the USA spike. 10 million people have claimed for unemployment benefits in the USA. The last time it wasn't even that big, the number got anywhere close to that was in fact at in the Great Depression. And so we do think about the big events, the Great Depression. People have been mentioning, obviously, the Spanish flu. We think about the impact of 2001 and 9/11, and we think more recently about the Great Recession of 2007, the global financial crisis. And I think in some respects, this crisis may dwarf all of those. And one of the reasons is that it does involve health. It's a crisis that has spread so fast and so far very quickly. And I think that's what's led us to this position where businesses have had to respond without any warning and deal with situations that have never been dealt with before. So we are in the land of the unprecedented, and in such a space, people, collaboration, as much wisdom as you can get in one room is valuable. And so for having all of you here, we really appreciate your time. And I know that most of you are under huge pressure. What I want to do is just quickly introduce the panel that we have here. And it's quite interesting. These are CEOs or CFOs from businesses that Multiply Group either directly or indirectly invests in. And what's great about this panel is that we've got a bit of diversity that we can hear from in our discussion. So we've got some people representing financial services. We've got Chris Totoy, who's the CEO of Custom Capital, so representing financial services. And then we've got some fintech businesses in the financial services category as well. We've got Ian Thompson, the CEO of QLink with us. And then we also have Dean Sparrow, the CEO of CrossFin, which is a holding company of a number of fintech businesses like Ikorka, Innovation, and SureSwap. And then we move from financial services and technology all the way into food supply and food distribution. We have the CFO of RCL Foods, Rob Field, with us. And we then have Henlo Weber, the CEO of IFS, which is also a food and catering business. So we've got a very interesting perspective from them. And then we move to something even more essential than food. We move to water. And we've got Delane Gray, who is in fact the CEO of SPS Tanks. And so we can hear about the impact in a company like water. And then finally, we have Craig Coombe, the CEO of Multiply Group, which is a private equity investment house. So I think we've got a broad spectrum of businesses that we're going to be hearing from. So let's get to the guests, because they're the important ones. And what I want to ask is each of them to respond, introduce themselves, and maybe just to get the conversation going, respond by telling us, you know, having been through 2 to 3 weeks now of this crisis, what have you seen as the priority as a business leader for your response to the COVID-19 crisis, its impact on your business? So maybe just one aspect which has been something that you've prioritized. So I'm going to start with the financial guys, if I can. And I'm going to start with Chris, if you don't mind maybe going first.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm in the lending space, predominantly into the small to medium-sized businesses. We're funders of fixed asset rental paper. And the interesting thing is that I always feel our business represents a lot of what our economy is in South Africa. Quite diverse across geographic regions, business sectors, small, medium, and large. And yeah, I think, you know, the reality is there's no manual that can prepare you for what we've been through. I think you could have gone to the best business school in the world, and this wouldn't have been one of the subjects that would have been on the curriculum. But having said that, I think, you know, the great thing about business is I've always said you can't hide anywhere. Business, you have to front up to what the circumstances present themselves as. And I think the greatest kind of priority at this time for me has been my own people. I've realized, you know, people rely on team. They rely heavily on leadership and vision. And I think what this situation has done is actually made people incredibly vulnerable, because being in isolation actually fuels this vulnerability. You know, so often you think you go into an office, you've got people around you, you've got the banter of the office. Well, now people sit in a room totally isolated with no banter, no relationship, no feel good. And I think actually people are feeling very vulnerable. So I've tried to focus and been very aware of the feelings of my people. And trying to reach them from an emotional and personal perspective. You know, questions that you normally wouldn't ask a staff member, because you just, you know, it's always business as usual. And so I've always tried to, during this time, I'm trying to touch base with my people, make sure emotionally and just psychologically they're in a good headspace. And finally, to say this, I think that one of the things that has really been exposed at this time is some of our mission statements and underlying core values. You know, we always put people at the forefront of our values and our mission statements. And the reality is when the chips are down, we've got to ask ourselves whether we resort to the profit, power, and popularity. Whereas actually people at this time, I think, have to be at the forefront of our businesses.
Thanks so much, Chris. And then let's keep in the financial services category, maybe. Ian, you're from QLink, also involved with collections. Maybe tell us a bit about you and your business, and the same question, the response, the priority.
100%. Thank you, Matt. Welcome to everybody. Yes, we are a collections optimization business, largely servicing large financial services groups. So a narrow base of clients, not an end consumer B2C, but a B2B. And in that sense, I'd probably say, I agree wholeheartedly with Chris with regard to priorities. I think before we could even get around how we're going to do best for our clients, consumers, it's ensuring that our teams are engaged to be able to deliver to our clients. So definitely the focus has primarily been right from the outset to make sure that our teams are comfortable, the whole work from home experiment. We were fortunate that we got to a running start quite early. So most of our teams have been working from home for the past 3 weeks already. So it's given us a bit of traction and background on how to deal and engage with our teams. I mean, Chris hit the nail on the head with regard to that kind of sense of isolation that people feel. It's definitely different. I think the novelty is kind of worn off now about the work from home experiment, and people are really into the thick of things about that isolation, that connection loss, that sense of overwhelmness has kind of come and gone now. So it's really getting that cadence and focus on our people to make sure that we focus on the priorities that are best for our clients. So my priority as an individual is exactly that, making sure my team has got everything that they need and are supported as wholeheartedly as possible with regard to systems and personal engagement to make sure that we then are able to deliver to our end clients and consumers. And I must say, it's been a phenomenal journey. The kind of spirit of people and the creativity around how to solve problems and how to engage with problems has been the standout point for me. I mean, there's many issues. There's been lots of bits and pieces that have fallen over. Nothing has run smoothly, or no matter how much planning we put into it. And that kind of human spirit around kind of a deliberate focus on how to solve problems. And I think that's kind of brought this kind of work from home sense and echoes what you've said, Matt, around how quickly you could get all the people around this call today. The speed at which we are able to respond and engage and look at creatively solving problems has been phenomenal, just as a standout for me. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Ian. And I think this human spirit issue that we're talking about, this the spirit of the human. I was just watching on Netflix. There's this movie that's on at the moment, The Darkest Hour, about Winston Churchill having to get the Dunkirk extraction of all the armies. And the spirit of the people came through in the darkest hour, and they patched together a solution, as we all know, with civilian boats to do what everybody thought was impossible. And it's just incredible to hear these stories about when the hour is darkest, people's tenacity comes through. So great to hear that story from your side, Ian, with QLink. Let's keep in the financial services sector, but let's go to a sector that's more exposed, the fintech business, CrossFin, a lot of exposure to retail businesses, a lot of exposure to SMME, a lot of impact as a result of this lockdown. Dean, do you want to talk to us a bit more about your business and the response?
Thanks, Matt. Very much so. So, I mean, just to contextualize it from a CrossFin point of view, we effectively are a diversified group of fintech assets. And obviously therein lies at this time a number of the complexities, because we don't talk about one specific business. We actually have to talk about multiple different types of businesses. And I think one common denominator that's definitely coming through clearly, both from Chris and then through Ian, and I can echo that as well, is obviously where we started our journey 3 weeks ago, where I guess crisis was really unfolding in the South African landscape, was very much around our people throughout the portfolio and the different businesses, and very much all of the common factors that have been already expressed around testing our resilience and the extent to which we align with our true values of our organization and how we value and treasure our people has been a fundamental component of where we applied our minds and energies, I would say almost in the first week of crisis unfolding. Fortunately, we were able to then move into a place where we felt we had put in place the structures necessary to well equip our teams to either be able to work remotely, where we've been fortunate enough to do in a number of areas, but we also have had areas where unfortunately our businesses have had to continue to source people into the likes of call centers and support environments, but preserving concepts around social distancing and not overcrowding. And then also creating almost shift-based work where we can rotate our teams in and out of operational environments so that we don't run the risk of a full team coming down simultaneously with the infection. So that's, consumed a huge amount of time and energy, and not just at the CrossFin level, but actually at the executive levels of our different businesses. So we got through that, I guess, in week one. Week two, our attention very much turned more to focus around our clientele across the businesses. And, from a CrossFin point of view, we can broadly categorize our clientele. You've touched on it, but some of it is very much in the informal market and in the SMME space, which has been really the very scary and concerning part of our landscape that we've had to apply our minds to. And then we have had, on the more positive side, the larger, more established corporate organizations that fortunately, just based on size, balance sheets and structure, obviously appear to be able to withstand the storm that's unfolding here a lot better than the SMME market. But what we've done effectively is we've engaged with all the clients across the portfolios to understand how best we can continue to service them in the midst of this crisis. And obviously, in the corporate world, a lot of them can consider and consume remote services. In the SME landscape and the extent of the lockdown, has obviously pushed our SMEs into a space where a large portion of them are fundamentally in lockdown and not actually operating at the moment. And that's where our biggest concern unfolds in our portfolio. I can give you some stats.
Maybe just to interrupt there, because I think our listeners and viewers might be interested. I mean, you've got some perspective on transaction volume drops and cash balance drops amongst that retail SME. Just give us a feeling in the heat of the lockdown, like, are we 20% down, 30, 50, 70? What's the feeling coming through? Can you share an idea of that?
Yeah, very much so. So our latest stats this week around post-lockdown, the transactional activity across the SME base appears to be down by 75%. So we're at 25% of the levels of prior to lockdown. And that 25% is largely being driven by effectively essential service providers in the market. So either of some form of grocery, retailing, or pharmaceutical, medical kind of goods provisioning. That's where we're seeing the activity come from. If it wasn't for that, I think we'd be cautious to say that we'd be at 0 type percent. So no, it's extreme. And, in our organization where there's a large portion of our revenue makeup that is aligned with a percentage of transactions processed, you can imagine that there's a direct correlation between a drop-off of transactional activity of that extent and what it looks like to our businesses in terms of revenue generation capability. And then there in turn turns our focus to, well, then how do we ensure that our businesses can actually remain sustainable in the realm of a cost structure that was obviously in place to service what traditionally was 100% of that transactional activity, and now is at 25% of it.
Sure.
So lots of questions around, what is the extent of the lockdown? How long is the lockdown going to continue for? Effectively, what we've done throughout our portfolio, working with our respective executive teams and their boards, has looked and planned for what we term our worst case scenario. So taking a view that this lockdown actually will extend for a fair period, and actually taking a view that maybe for the better part of the next 6 months, we're not going to see the kind of transactional activity levels that we saw pre-lockdown. And then how do we ensure that the cash structures and the cost structures of the businesses are aligned to ensure that we can be convinced that we'll be sustainable through that period? That's within our own businesses. And that's effectively week two's work, if you wish, from a CrossFin point of view that's unfolded.
Sure.
Where we are now, fortunately, is we're in week 3. And week 3, our focus and attention has turned very much to say, well, how do we ensure that the SME market in particular in the South African landscape can actually withstand the storm? Because fundamentally from us, making sure that we have a robust SME market that is still sustainable and can come out the other side within the South African landscape at a minimum is key. Key not only to the South African economy, but key to us as an organization and our continual relevance in the market. And, fortunately, we have many tools at our disposal that we can leverage to help facilitate and provide
I'm going to come to that in a moment, Dean. I just want to pick the other guys, but I want to come back to that point of how we can respond. Maybe let's move from the SMEs and the retailers to everybody's got to eat still. So there are some businesses that are essential services that are providing food and the water we're still drinking and the great coffee. So Rob Field, CFO of RCL Foods, maybe your experience has been a bit different in RCL Foods, maybe not, maybe just share with us what's happening in that business.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thanks to you and Craig for hosting this. Our experience has certainly been different. Probably our starting point is one of a sense that we're in a very privileged position to be able to play a role in feeding the nation. As a fairly large food business here in South Africa, it's been amazing to see how our people have rallied behind the call of the president to respond in every way possible. And we're not an insignificant organization from a number of people perspective. And so our key priority started with defining, the most important thing is to keep our people safe. We've got 23,000 people moving to 56 different facilities around the country. And you can imagine the logistical nightmare associated with doing that in the first few days of lockdown. But that was our first promise to our people. Then obviously for the nation's sake and for everyone else's benefit, we need to keep producing. And so those supply chains need to continue to work. And for those that know our business, we've got a distribution arm. And so it's about getting that food to market as well. And then lastly, the engine requires oiling, and that's in the form of cash. And so that's been profiled very appropriately as a thing that everybody needs to play their part. I mean, we're in a very integrated supply chain system, and it can come down as a pack of cards at any moment when any of the key players don't play their role. And we understand that everybody has different impacts across their space, but we've consistently made appeals to all of our supply chain partners and service providers is to lean in this time. And play your role. So, that's been from a leadership point of view, some of the key focus for us. I think just generally communication and honest and regular communication has been something that's been a driving priority for us. I think Cyril's setting a very good example in that regard from a country perspective. But we're working differently. The guys are talking about working remotely, and we're forced to become a lot more agile and much quicker in terms of our decision-making processes. I'm actually loving it, the way we're forced to kind of connect more regularly with our senior executive teams, and it's feels more streamlined and feels more efficient. But I think the overarching thing is the weight responsibility that we carry to primarily and first and foremost look after our employees and make sure that they're safe and that they are able to get to work and stay healthy. And everything that we've seen so far in terms of the first 2 weeks of effort, we're in a groove now as a business. But it's massive kudos to our people. They've stepped up. You talk about that human spirit. What's flying around on social media with our people is heartening. It's a very proud thing, and it's an amazing thing to witness. So long may that last, and long may we continue to cope and keep all our operations open. But we take it day by day.
Well, thanks, Rob. And I think the point you made about supply chain, very real in your world, a supply chain. And we've heard messages, we may talk about this later on, where if you don't look after that supply chain, or somebody in the supply chain decides to not be a part of that supply chain by holding on to money that maybe is due, that can cause unintended consequences. And we've had some examples of that. We may talk about it a bit later, but glad to hear that yours is still being looked after and the food's getting to the table. We certainly are seeing the food in the shops, which must mean that you're doing your part. Thank you very much for that. Moving on then, in the same food distribution space, we're going to move over to Henlo Weber. He's from IFS. I know that you guys have a lot of responsibility outside of the borders, and international travels in lockdown. So maybe you've got different challenges, Henlo, you want to just tell us about.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me here. But yeah, I think you hit it there with the first point, is that we're operating in 8 different countries, and each of them have their own complexities around their lockdown or movement of people. So as we speak now, we've got a whole lot of expats that are working for us, predominantly South Africans, that are stuck in the DRC and Mozambique, Zambia. And wow. The positive side for us is obviously that we're still able to service our clients, and it's maintaining a steady flow of income to keep the business alive. But at the same time, you've got these people that you're relying on, and they're the ones that are sitting there away from their families. And we in a way actually privileged lockdown at home with our families here in South Africa. So it's just giving recognition behind that and making sure that they feel that the company's behind them and supporting them, because they're the guys that are fighting the fight for us at this point. So for us, a 3-week journey, very similar to some of the people that you mentioned, but we sort of captured it under 4 elements, all under sort of one priority. So it was business continuity plans per contract, because it's so different, our business. We've got school feeding in Namibia, copper mines in the DRC, coal in Mozambique, oil and gas in Mozambique, Sabanya even in Johannesburg, where each contract has their own elements to ensure continuity of service. And how we captured that was our people. Firstly, the very first thing was, if we had a positive case within our organization, how would we handle it? How would we handle it with our employees? Where would be the nearest hospital if it became a severe case? How would we then institute enhanced hygiene control, social distancing, sanitizing, additional PPE, obviously to give our clients comfort around our service? And then the second thing was cash flow, just which was mentioned now from RCL, is that that's just a big priority. And then supply chain, getting the stocks to site. And then fourth are the clients. And I know some clients would be, why are they fourth? But I think if you get your people right and they're happy to be out there and feel safe, you've got your cash flow that you're able to supply the sites, that essentially they end up becoming first, because it becomes business as usual as long as we're covering those 3 pillars. And that's how we sort of handle it. And as an executive team, we started beginning of March, every morning, 9 o'clock, contract by contract, what are we going to do? And make sure that there is a continuity of service and looking after our people. Those were the fundamental pillars. And that just escalated as the situation evolved. And I mean, to be honest with you, in the first 2 weeks, I think we were all a bit naive, saying it's all in Europe, it's not around us. And I think just before that lockdown message, so in between the disaster and the lockdown, we all had like a coming together, say, guys, this is serious, it's right on our doorstep. And I think then everyone realized how quick we had to do things and make sure that we were out there and protecting our business.
So from fintech, financial services, to fintech, to food on the table, and we all need water. And there's been a lot of talk about the need for water, specifically in some of the poorer communities where suddenly you've got people locked down and they need storage, water tanks. SBS Tanks CEO Delane Gray, talk to us. Delane, you are on mute, so you're going to need to unmute if you want to talk to us.
Certainly, I do want to talk to you, and yeah, certainly thank you again for the opportunity, and sorry to those with all the technical problems. It shows you that for some, working remotely is easy, and for others it's a challenge. For me, it's a challenge. Being a people-orientated person, I actually am taking quite a lot of strain being removed from my staff in this particular situation. And it's interesting how, as human beings, we feed off of each other. So back to the initial question, response. What was our response? Our first response was our people. It seems to be a common thread from everybody's perspective. Look after my people. If my people are in a good space and if they are taken care of, then the business will be in a good space and it will function correctly. So our first approach was people. Good communication at all levels. So that was internal levels of communication and obviously external levels of communication, because as the shutdown was making its way, our nature of our business was being challenged. Out on site, we were needing to advise clients that we're closing and we bringing people back home because of the circumstance. And of course that provoked certain responses from clients. So there's a certain amount of client management that has had to be improved upon in this whole journey. And I think at the same time, we can't deny that we've had to look at finances, you know, cash flow. How much is going to be able to be realized? How much of what we've done contractually is going to be paid for? And how many of our clients might use the prevailing circumstance as their key excuse why they can't meet their commitment? So yeah, I think the other guys have all commented, there are multiple levels of response that were required from a business, certainly one like ours, which is a manufacturing business with an installation component. And yeah, just the question that has been asked of us is, how have we been working with this call for water in the country? And interestingly enough, it has passed us by as a business, to be very honest, because it's a interim measure. It's an emergency call for very small water storage tanks throughout the country. And us as a business, we are positioned in the bigger, more long-term infrastructure within the country. So our time to shine is still to come, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a part of the sustainability issue. There's almost that sort of euphoria, if I can call it that. I don't think it's the right word, where everybody is energized in this first 2-3 weeks, but we need to sustain solutions, and I'm sure your tanks and your water supply solutions will be key as time goes on. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of new priorities for economies and for countries that include some of these basic requirements: healthcare, food, water supply. So I think that's something we'll talk about in a moment. If you are watching on YouTube, we do take questions. We will get to some of those questions if we can. So if you want to ask a question, I think you can do that on the comments page, and we can get someone to answer that question. But we've got one last person just to give us an initial hello and response. And that's from a Multiplier perspective, the CEO of Multiplier, Craig Coombe, really looking at it from the sort of viewpoint of the investor. And I know that most investors have fled for the hills. So it'll be interesting to see what Craig isn't in the hills. He's here with us. So maybe he has some wisdom to share.
Thanks very much, Matt. And yeah, welcome to everyone. Thanks for the time. Yeah, look, I think it's been really encouraging for me to hear from this team, and obviously I've been engaging quite extensively over the last couple of weeks with predominantly leadership boards of the underlying businesses that we invested in. And I think for me, again, it's the people conversation that I think has been emphasized at every level. I think for me, what I've been incredibly privileged to be a part of is to be a part of the many boards that have worked tirelessly. I mean, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I think on average, I've been attending maybe 8 Zoom calls a day, mostly board meetings. I think for most of the companies we've been involved with, especially the smaller guys or guys that are under a lot more pressure, sometimes that's been 2 or 3 board interactions over the last 2 weeks, which, to me, it's been amazing to see the commitment of leaders. And I think, it's something that I know for people working often in environments, you don't always see what's going on in the background. Certainly for me, I've seen just incredible commitment. And I've been very heartened by the response of teams to their people. So I think the guys that are talking, it's not a sort of a politically correct thing to say what they're saying. I mean, I've seen it, and it's given me a little bit of belief maybe in our capitalist economy, which sometimes can just be a little bit bottom line driven. I've been really, really excited by that. I think maybe just something that's really come out as well is because of the need for technology in this over this time. I've been really impressed by young people and how they've stepped up to the challenge. There's certainly in our business, we had to pivot very quickly. And I mean, the technology applications, the coaching that certainly younger guys in our business have been providing to me personally has been encouraging to see. And I think, with every crisis that we have and every situation we go through, there's going to be some really hard things we got to work through, but there's also going to be some interesting observations that are going to come out. And I think for me, it's early days still, but I really just want to encourage all the leaders that are out there to look after yourselves. I think a good friend of mine who runs an international business, he's the kind of guy, when there's a problem, he runs out there and he tries to solve every problem. And because of the business, it's got quite a big involvement in Italy, so they kind of seen a lot of what's been happening. And in fact, I think they're operating in 10 countries across the globe, and 2 or 3 of their CEOs have been sick. And I think these sick guys were actually saying, look, Steve, you can't get out there you've got to actually stay away from the danger, because when the CEO and key management go down, it just creates complete chaos. The communication goes, the leadership goes. So that's been an interesting observation. And I think for him, he's not that kind of guy. He sees a problem and he runs at it. So I think for him, it's been difficult to be sort of staying a little bit remote, but I've been seeing what he's been doing in his business and keeping it going. He's part of the essential service solutions. And it's not even easy. Like, a lot of essential service businesses aren't running at 100%. So his business, to deliver what he needs to as essential services, which is chemicals, which deals with a lot of the pharmaceutical and the sanitizing space, he's got to operate 50% of his business for maybe 35% of the revenue. So even for a lot of those businesses, it's quite tough. They've got to get their staff to and from site. So I think it's been a very, very interesting journey. Maybe some observations that for me have been young people. Just encourage you guys, don't lose heart. Especially guys that are operating small businesses, guys that are in the technology space. There's a lot of opportunities out there to actually help get other people back up on their feet and get going. So I think we've got to, I think it's about also looking now for the opportunities to keep everyone up and running, because we're all dependent on one another as businesses. Businesses need customers, customers need to be, working, earning money. So I think it's going to be a journey that I think South Africa is ready for. I think I've been fairly excited as well to see how people have been working together to try and make sure that we get through this.
Thanks, Craig. I think it's a good segue to what we wanted to chat about next. I mean, we've entitled this panel discussion "Lessons in Lockdown." I think it's a bit presumptive. We don't know when lockdowns finish, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more. But I just, maybe, to ask one or two of you maybe to volunteer if there's any specific lesson. We've been talking about the fortitude of people. We've been talking about responding to look after our people. Is there any lesson or any insight that any of you have had over the last 2 weeks that you think, wow, that's something I'm going to keep with me for a while? Chris, you're shaking your head. I'm going to look at the response here on the screen. You have something you want to share, maybe just as a lesson, something that's...
Yeah, I think one of the things that has been very sobering, Matt, is the reality is a lot of businesses are genuinely 1 month away from bankruptcy.
Yeah.
I mean, we're only 13 days in, and we've noticed in our portfolio is the psyche of people. My brother, who's kind of responsible for the collections of our book, has told me stories of a man 30 years in business, never defaulted, and literally crying on the phone because he can't pay his rental. And we're not talking about big transactions, and what we've learned, the biggest lesson I think we're learning is different people respond differently in times of crisis. And I think the learning is that we've got to be careful that you're almost responding to someone who's acting out of character. So if you look at some of our engagement, what we're finding is initially people are remorseful that they haven't paid their rental, but they go from remorse to anger because now they're angry. And then the final emotion is they've got to blame someone. So then they blame you, and we found we've got to be very careful. You're almost responding to people that are not in a rational state of mind. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we've learned is that, I think intrinsically in all of us, there is this value that if you borrow money, you want to repay it. But what happens is when you get into a desperate situation, you respond. The reality is different people respond differently, and so I think that's been one of the biggest learnings for us as a business. And then the second thing is that I think relationships, are so key at this time. Trusted relationships, because you realize that what you need authentic relationships to weather the storm. And trusted relationships, voices that you can trust, because you guys will all, I'm sure, agree with me, there's so much information floating around, but what do you believe? what information do you take as real? What do you take as fake? And I think sometimes we sit in our studies at home, like we all are now, bombarded with information, and we've got to decipher between those voices that we can trust and those that we just discard. And so those are some of the learnings that we found over this time, is that you need a team around you of trusted voices, trusted relationships, and ultimately you can work it out together. But it's interesting times.
Yeah, very honest and very insightful for how we all respond differently and even differently in different times. Same person, we can be very positive now, and then tomorrow we can be feeling quite dark. Anybody else want to offer some?
Matt, I'm happy to pitch in.
Yeah, go for it, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing has been around people, and we've said a bit about it already. It's been amazing to witness how people can respond in times of crisis like this, and it's been, in our business experience, very positive. But the additional point that I thought to raise was around real collaboration. I mean, our business, as an example, has a very long supply chain, many suppliers, many customers in the mix, and collaboration is just how business works. You've got to a point of efficiency, and you're highly integrated in how you operate. But we've been tested now in terms of what real collaboration is all about, and what we've been missing perhaps from an economic perspective here in South Africa. Certainly, we represent big parts of the sugar and the chicken industries here in South Africa. And we've been struggling, to be honest, over many years to get onto the same page as government. And in a very short space of time, I'm very pleased to be able to say that collaboration has changed. And we're in unique space now. It's different, and the quick decision-making that is flowing by virtue of the two-way dialogue that's happening, unblocking when they realize how important it is to feed the nation, that we realize how much we need to rely on each other in these times of crisis. So it's been a fantastic experience. Long may it remain. May this set the ground for the future in terms of how we need to broadly collaborate as businesses. And I think government, probably to their own admission, will acknowledge that they've been a missing partner in some of the role that they've needed to play. But hopefully that's changing, and we're certainly experiencing it to date.
Yeah, and on that point, I think some are saying that maybe this has given them a bit of space to actually act faster, certainly together with business, and make some of the big decisions. But I guess we'll only know that a bit later on. But I think it's a very powerful point you're making. Maybe one other, just to share one of those lessons, because we've got some other specific items that we're hearing from the audience and that we want to talk to. But anybody else want to share an overriding lesson that we haven't maybe spoken to yet?
Matt, I mean, I can add something, yeah. It's maybe not so much a lesson as maybe an accentuation of reality, right? And obviously it's very specific in terms of our focus area around the SMME space. And what we've seen, particularly over the last week, is that as of, I think it was last week, Friday, you had around 81,000 registered SMMEs that had gone onto a government-provided portal to register their reality in the market. And then flowing from that was the ability for them to then apply for some form of debt or funding relief, which then opened up subsequently. Now, of the 81,000 SMMEs that registered, there only effectively at that stage 2,000 that had formally gone through the application process and submitted the formal application. So we delved into that a little bit to try and understand the gap between the 81,000 and the 2,000 applicants formally. And some of it is communication, but there's no doubt in my mind that the process of applying for relief is very cumbersome and very traditional in its way. So if you go into the length of the documentation that you need to upload onto the portal to formally underpin your application, and I look at that from a point of view of understanding the process of applying for finance, and I think about 81,000 SMMEs in the market, I say, sure, there's a whole lot of people out there that need their hands to be held to get through the process, to get the documentation in or some information in that is sufficient enough to allow the relief that's been made available to be unlocked and effectively afforded to these SMMEs.
And Dean, I think that's a great segue to one of the questions we've had here, because we talk about one of the big things that often is an emphasis at this time, you know, and you guys have mentioned it a bit, is this idea of liquidity. Look after your cash flow. And so there's a sense from a business point of view that we do put up a bit of the barriers to make sure we can pay for our own staff and look after our own sustainability. And that seems to make sense, and I think it's right. But there's this idea we've been talking also about collaboration, supply chains, looking after the SMMEs. And this speaks to kindness and generosity beyond your own, as it were, but we are all a part of a bigger system. And so one of the questions we've had is actually from one of our listeners or viewers, we might call them, and they were asking, you know, what do we think about payment to suppliers who we've got contracts with who can't deliver to us at the moment? So, for example, this particular individual saying he's got a landscaping type company. Obviously, they're not doing the landscaping. Do we continue paying the contract we may have with them? We've also had examples of some large corporates not paying their suppliers when they could, just because they want to make sure that they can carry on going for 9 months. I'd be interested to hear, you know, any commentary on that. So the first question is, what is your view? I mean, you're obviously looking after your own funding. How do you also look after the supply chain? How do you also show that generosity? How do you get that balance?
Sure.
Wow, that's a tough one. Rob, you want to go?
I'm happy to give it a go, because it's a live show for us. It's extremely difficult, and we're having lots of these conversations as a team. And I'll sadly have to admit that we've been disappointed by a number of participants in our own supply chain in terms of their attitude. And I don't know if I can just put it down to that they haven't kind of absorbed the seriousness of this pandemic and what it means for business, especially the vulnerable businesses, the small SMMEs that you talk about. So we've done the level best that we can to appeal to people and to try and get everybody on the same page. And, you know, so for us, fortunately, our system continues, obviously not at a full 100% operational level, but we're still reliant on everybody in the chain playing their part. And as I said earlier, that pack of cards can come down very, very quickly. So we're challenging ourselves to do the honorable thing, to always do the right thing. And obviously your people are first, and your supply base is critically important. But obviously our conversations, half of my job is switched to becoming a credit manager, to be honest. But I think when you get to the right level within organizations, you find that there's a reasonable response. You're able to have a proper conversation. So maybe sometimes it's just the system that pushes back inappropriately, hasn't thought it through clearly, and what the implication of the action might be. But there's no doubt it's a hell of a difficult balancing act, and we've all just got to play our part. And especially if this thing continues, I think everybody's got a little bit of leeway to survive for on reserves for a bit. But should this thing extend, and should the economic impact of this extend, you know, weeks and months, then I think we're going to all be really tested in this space.
And it's this idea that yes, we can look after our own, but we are a collective. I know, Ian, you were talking about a survey where you were surveying your staff in response to how they're feeling. And obviously many of them felt good about their jobs, but they were still battling because of their spouses. Maybe just talk more to the response of your staff and that particularly, that, you know, we have an integrated response, not just our people and their job.
100%. Thanks, Matt. Yes, you're right. So, you know, as part of our kind of deliberate way in which we're choosing to engage with the team, one of the things was, over and above the normal engagements, we kind of sent out a little survey, very short and concise, just to pick up. And I mean, I think we all realize that it's all good and well saying look after your teams, but definitely the impact has been much wider, and team members, family, spouses have already been impacted directly, even if we as Q-Link possibly haven't been impacted as directly currently. People are already losing their jobs. People are already talking about retrenchments. You can see it in the news. The other day, there was an article of 4 large employers cutting hours, cutting workday weeks. So the impact is definitely much wider than just trying to look after your own team, and is then trying to provide that support during this time, because it's an overwhelming time for most employees to be in, let alone your own circumstances in your own business. But yes, trying to look at the broader context to try and find out, you know, what there is that you can do. And that's just to touch back on your previous point about paying suppliers. Look, it's different because different businesses are affected in different ways, but you know, our perspective is to try and do the right thing. We appreciate that There are a wider impact on the economy if we do not pay our suppliers. So our approach is definitely to try and pay our suppliers on time generally. That doesn't mean we defer non-essential expenses and we haven't gone through all the normal deliberate focus points to make sure we focus on our liquidity. But definitely, I think everybody, as Robert said, has to play their part in the economy. Otherwise, it doesn't help. You're the only one standing and a whole lot of people around you have fallen over. So deliberately trying to play your part in the broader economy, appreciating that different businesses obviously experience that slightly differently.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely.
And I come in there as well. I think one of the keys for business and for all of us as society to maybe just understand here is that this is a moment in time, and it's not forever if it's handled correctly. And therefore, it's a moment in time where you actually have to reevaluate and rethink how you engage. The standard processes can't always apply in exactly the same way. Because if we can get as many businesses through this together, we'll have a stronger economy on the other side. And it's months, and it's really about like the vision of are we looking at 2 months, 3 months, 6 months? Sometimes even when you took 12 months in business, that feels like a long time. But actually, in the context of our society, if you take in the context of our children and on their futures and the futures of our nation, it's a short window. And I think that, to me, what's been encouraging is senior leadership taking, agreeing to have big cuts, salary cuts quickly early on in this process, just as a representation of we're sitting at home, there's not a lot to be done. We're not going on holiday. We're not going out to restaurants. We're not doing a whole lot of things. We're going to fight the fight now, and it's a period in time. It's not forever. And I think just to encourage business people, I think you've almost got to walk to the edge of that cliff and actually grieve in a real meaningful way what you feel you may have lost or that you may lose. And then walk back away from that edge and actually say, we're going to actually fight now. We're going to pull on some energy that we know we've got inside of us. And we're going to do it in a collective way, and in a way in which when you look back on it, we'll go, it was only 6 months, or it was only a year. It was probably the toughest journey we've ever been on, but it was actually character forming. It did something deeply profound in us. I mean, we found it even just at a spiritual level, the engagements of people have just shifted from just very, very short-sighted to much more longer, a much more longer view of what life is really about, of what family is really about. So just, I think maybe, I'm putting that as a sort of an overlay around the concept of, like, do you do things a bit differently? Do you pay somebody who hasn't done the work? I think my suggestion would be wherever you can do that. And I think you'll have friendships and you'll have commitments from people beyond, the value of that, and see it as an investment, not as an expense. It's obviously got to be done responsibly within the context of your own liquidity. But, it's about getting people to survive a 6 to 12 month period.
Yeah, and I think, in such crises, good stories and bad stories will be remembered. The key is they'll always be remembered, whether they're good or bad. Let's try and be those who are telling the good stories. I want to change tact a little bit if I can. We've got some questions and I want to try and respond to them as well, because we don't always get such experience in the room. In respect of this new realm of distributed working, we are physically isolated. Maybe just run through the panel. Has your team's productivity gone down, remained the same, gone up, and maybe one tool that you're seeing as being highly impactful? So I'm going to call you out and maybe quick responses. I've given you the question, so you've got to think quickly. Henlo, from your side, up, down, same?
Pretty much, I think more because of the remoteness and not having that quick conversation to the person sitting next to you. So I think there's been a lot of work in isolation and talking a lot more to the teams out there, using the platforms like Zoom, Skype, WhatsApp. So it's been, I think, more at certain levels, less at others, depending on where you fit in the business. So if a contract, for example, is reduced in capacity, the supply side and the ordering side might have reduced as well. So it's a mixture across the board,
depending on the function. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's have a look. Dean.
Yeah, definitely improved, Matt. I think fundamentally any meeting that wasn't really of any real substance or urgency has been parked, and the focus is all on stuff that is adequately, focused and prioritized. So platforms are exactly what's just been mentioned, which is WhatsApp, Zoom, email. We're very engaged as a team, fortunate to work very remotely, and in fact, definitely seen an uptick in terms of the effectiveness of the team.
Elaine?
Yeah, I think I echo. We've got some areas where there's more engagement and efficiency maybe, but there's a lot of areas in our business, which is a manufacturing in a factory and also not on site, which are exceptionally challenged at the moment. They're non-existent.
Or to be virtual there. Yeah, exactly. Ian?
Yeah, Matt. So on average, I definitely say there's been an increase. Some of it healthy, obviously, yes, less traffic, more focused meetings about getting production, getting stuff done quicker. But there's also, the kind of unhealthy part of it, which we're also trying to keep people aware of, is that the kind of work-life balance, because obviously you want to see this through past the 21 days if it has to be longer. So although an increase in productivity, which is fantastic, but yes, being conscious of the fact that it's got to be healthy and sustainable over the longer term.
Yeah. Chris, I know you guys have used some unique tools that you had already that have been helpful.
Yeah, I think that working remotely, actually, I'm wondering whether I need to be renting my offices at Multiply.
Oh.
No, but I think it's interesting because some people need structure to operate within a structured environment. And I've been quite impressed with our staff. I think people have responded well. I think my accountant had a good champagne lunch the other day, but other than that, you've got to be very careful of social media. But no, I think they've operated well. We've turned off the taps in terms of lending because we source most of our paper from suppliers who obviously aren't able to engage with their customers. So our main kind of focus is the collection of our portfolio. So it'll be interesting to see how we adapt even that going forward, because obviously we've got to grow. So it'll be interesting in terms of limited access to customers.
Rob, I suppose most of your guys are still physically, you're not as having to operate in this dispersed way?
Yeah, so everyone that can work remotely is working remotely. So from our national office, that's the vast majority of people. So we're having a crash course in how to work remotely and using technology, which is fantastic. So I hope we carry it into our future world in terms of being more efficient. Obviously, what we're focused on now is dealing with the crisis. So every other project has fallen by the wayside for now. Yeah. And so it does feel like we're well engaged and using technology really well.
Laser focus. I think that's a great segue to say, does business change? I mean, we always talk about what happened after 2001, the 9/11, travel changed forever. No longer could you bring your beer can onto the plane, and you had to go through a strip search and all those things that we know change in air travel. Does business change fundamentally after this? And what are going to be the things when we look back at this, and we will get through it, and we look back and we say, wow, we don't do that the same? I mean, I'm implying that maybe what we're talking about, that working from home is going to become a bigger factor. What other big changes are we seeing in business and in economies post-COVID crisis? Anybody want to answer that big question?
I mean, I've got one perspective, Matt, which I'm happy to throw in the pot. I mean, there's no doubt to me that what this is doing is it's accelerating the adoption of technology and leveraging technology as an enabler to get things done historically that would have been done more manually. And often we find that we can build the best and most attractive piece of technology, but the consumer and the actual adoption of it is based on what ultimately will drive the consumer to adopt it. And in this scenario, you're finding that kind of across the board, mass innovation is having to be almost accepted and adopted by the consumer. And a very, very small example I'll give you is something that we've been working on earlier this week, is the concept around distributing virtual vouchers for the ability to afford groceries in some of our big retail stores, which has been around as a capability for an extended period of time. But we've seen a significant ramp up in the distribution and in the consumption of those virtual vouchers.
Sure. Yeah, so that's a big change. Anybody else got any views on?
Yeah, look, Matt, I think Happy. Thanks, Robert.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it'll be, I mean, if we think back about this, it'll be deeply disappointing if we get to the end of this and things just refer back to business as usual. That would be such a wasted opportunity. So, I mean, obviously from a wider context, exactly as Dean had said, the embracing of the kind of digital economy, moving the technology. So I think all of that will happen, and then on your own business as well. So, I mean, when we reflect back on what we've learned and how that has to meaningfully change our business, I mean, the basic things about rental, but just the adoption of the technology. And if you just think, I can give you a practical example, the speed at which things are happening now. Why? Because it's more focused and directed. A business process today, actually, that usually took about 4 weeks to deal with historically. At best, if you could push it with all the meetings with people, maybe 2 weeks. In this environment, just because people are focused in getting things done and focusing on the real conversation, it took 2 days. So I would personally be very disappointed if we fall back to business as usual. It's now really trying to keep that momentum going wider than just your own organization to embrace that digital environment as a business going forward.
Yeah, no, that's a very strong point. Rob, you were coming in as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say for our business, I think it's going to be a very real shift. Online shopping's been around for a long time. It's not new. But as I said just now, you know, we've all having a crash course in how to operate using technology and online. And for some of us more challenged in that space, we have to learn a bit more than others. But I think coming out of this, there's going to be, I don't need to go to the mall that much anymore. I've built a level of trust in how I can access and in the supply chain of stuff getting to you via online, and we're going to have time delivered to us as a consequence that we'll employ productively elsewhere. So I think that is going to be a significant change from a retail landscape perspective into the future. And I think we've just had a little bump just to give everyone a little crash course lesson on that it's possible and that's very efficient.
Well, I don't think a little lesson, quite a big lesson. Delane?
Yeah, I think I'd like to just say that I think we're going to see a big shift in the consumer, but you know, Rob speaking from retail consumer, I'm most probably speaking from big client or corporate that's going to buy a $1 million or a 2 million rand investment. They're going to look at how they do business significantly different. And I think we're going to move into a very price sensitive market where you're going to see people very much thinking about their spend more than they might have even previously. And then because, as the others have said, there's this increased expectation that things can be done quicker, that's going to have its own set of problems as well, because clients have become expectant of things happening almost press button. And there's certain industries, one of ours, by example, that's not going to be able to be done. You're still going to have to take so many weeks for production and then for transport and then for installation. So the management of expectations is going to change significantly as we move forward.
Especially with the pent-up energy. I mean, maybe Craig, coming to you in terms of change after that. I mean, we're in the private equity industry, the investment industry. We measure businesses by a famous internal rate of return. It's a financial metric, and our funders want it, and the banks want those returns. How do you see that maybe changing post-COVID?
I definitely think that there's going to be a shift in values. You know, we're already seeing it. I think a lot of you know, investors who aren't value driven aren't going to survive. And I think a lot of investors that have and are pushing hard on a understanding of a bigger impact that businesses have are going to come to the fore. You know, I think maybe one of the challenges and maybe the opportunities that I'm hoping that this crisis will create. So, you know, it's often said, you know, you're not good to waste a good crisis. And I think one of the things that we need to deeply think about as business and government actually, and as consumers, is how do we ensure that we are a more equitable society in many respects. And one of the areas is in digital. You know, I think one of the challenges at the moment is that there's two worlds operating here, some that are battling to connect and some that are connected fully by technology. And, you know, I look at the television, I look at, you know, old pensioners, you know, people in their 60s, 70s queuing to get grant funding. It's not right, actually. It's actually it's a major, major challenge. There's technology that can deliver that safer, more hygienically, more healthily, and it's always been there. That technology has been there forever, and I think there's a need now to actually allow technology to be a massive digital enabler for the poor in our nation, because it can deliver at such low cost. And that's maybe one of my frustrations with what I'm seeing at the moment. And that could be even like, how do you pass back, if you want to support some SMMEs over this period of time, we should be able to digitally, provide the information. And I know there are systems. I know, Dean, in some of your businesses like a Corker, that, obviously not, there's a limited client base, but exactly what they were trading or what they needed. So you could, from your systems, work out exactly how much money they need to sustain themselves, not what their revenue line was, because they've got costs as well. But if you wanted to provide, grant funding or low cost loans or whatever into those environments, it's absolutely possible. The key now is that we need to make sure these systems are in place, because this is one crisis. There's going to be other. I mean, this is the third or fourth one that I'm living through, and I'm not that old. And you kind of I think we need to build that resilience into our economy and try and level out the playing fields for the poor. And I think the reality is that's a massive opportunity to grow our economy. I mean, most of our economy isn't even. We look at GDP, we're not even recording it. We don't know what our GDP is. We're guessing our GDP. And the more we can actually get people engaged, I think it's going to be helpful. But I do think investors, those investors that don't shift their mind towards a more broad-based evaluation of what is profits, are going to find themselves on the wrong end of these kind of crises.
Definitely the wrong end of history. Guys, we're going to start wrapping up. I'm going to do some quick questions. Fire away. If you've got an answer, just come in with the answer. And we're just going to hit them because we want to acknowledge the people that have been watching. So Imogen asks, and my eyes aren't that good, I'm sorry. What is the general view on COVID-19 testing for all staff when they get back in?
Yes.
What a view? We're allowed to go back to work. COVID-19 testing. Anybody with a view?
Definitely.
Definitely. All right, I'm seeing quite a few nods there, Imogen. Others unsure. I'm not sure what the right party line will be, but I'm sure if that's available in a very fast way, it would just make it better for everybody. We have another question here. As far as rentals are concerned, in Australia and other countries, what's being applied is you pay based on the revenue you've received. So if your revenue has dropped by 50%, you pay your landlord 50%. What do you think of that idea for the interim?
I don't think there's a landlord on our panel, but that sounds like a great idea, yes.
I think Mr. Coombe could be a landlord.
Yeah, we're a landlord. That sounds good. That sounds good.
Matt,
as long as it works both ways.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
a bit of upside maybe there.
Matt,
yes, go for it, Chris.
We in our development that we're doing in the Arch, we've introduced a business model which is based on a percentage of your revenue. And I think that one of the sectors that's been hugely hit is obviously the restaurant business.
Exactly.
And if you got a big overhead as a restaurateur, you're dead. So I think, especially in the hospitality restaurant space, you're going to see a massive shift in terms of this exact thing, the rental based on your turnover.
And that works on rentals. And I know, Dean, in your business connection, you've got to. Do you mind just talk quickly about that model?
So we have the low touch model in our retail capital merchant cash advance business. Very much runs on a percentage of revenue, and so it basically ups and downs the repayment of the advance that's been granted based on the trading activity of the merchants. So obviously, in the current month of April, effectively that whole low touch base, one can assume, is going to have very little, if any, repayment of the facilities that were to advance them, without even having to pick up a phone and having to discuss and agree payment terms and delays and payment holidays. So obviously
that's another one. This is probably about the most serious question we've had from one of the listeners. It says, let's get real now. After lockdown, with Jake White's appointment to help rescue the Bulls, will that be successful? Any view?
No.
Sorry, you're on the wrong
Look, the Bulls need as much help as they can get, and if that's Jake White, good for them.
All right, okay. So I don't think we really care what all these panel guys believe about that, but that's Another question I think is very interesting. Do we think that as a result of what we've seen in COVID-19, you mentioned it a bit in terms of digital payments, what do we think about cash? Is this the big knock for cash in Africa? Are we going to see, or certainly in South Africa, like cash reduced by 20, 30, 40%?
I definitely believe it's a catalyst to reduce cash, definitely.
And I mean, that's an efficiency thing, take away a lot of costs and issues in our market. So that would be...
And it's a health issue as well. I mean, we're seeing it's a massive health concern because money is moving hands all the time. You can't worry about people, but where's money moving?
So we talked a lot about technology. We talked about using it more effectively, how it's helped us all here. The big question in South Africa is that we have 30% unemployment prior to this. They're talking about the disaster in the USA that it may go to 13%, which is a disaster for them. We are 30 pre-COVID. Who knows where we may end up post-COVID? What do you think? If we employ more digital technologies, are we not going to further exacerbate the employment issue?
Matt, can I come in?
Lane, absolutely.
Just want to go back one question. I think the question that was posed about rental, it's also a service provider, and we need to just be mindful how we answer that one, because if you don't pay your rent, you can't really effectively operate your business from those premises, because that service provider has just been denied their income stream as well. So I think that conversation needs a communication between landlord and tenant before we just decide not to pay rent. That's the one. The other one, just quickly, you say post-COVID, what's the unemployment going to be? I think what we've got to really, as business, both formal and informal business, is we've got to look at the manufacturing sector, because if we give that a massive injection and a boost, we can create a number of employment positions for the masses of the country. That then means we have to have an export focus, and we've got to manufacture goods and services that can be exported, which will, impact GDP. We must be mindful that we don't go about seeing job losses on one side and not creating job opportunities on another. So my take is that we don't have to lose jobs. First thing is, let's go with the mindset of job retention, those that we can retain. And then let's speak to government as the private sector and ask that the manufacturing sector actually gets massively boosted at this point, so that those that are lost in restaurant, retail, and that are taken over by digital can maybe be replaced by manual labor again, where we used to be strong.
I think that's an incredibly insightful point. I think that especially when we had the early 2000s exchange rate crisis, this country responded incredibly in the export area and in manufacturing. Many companies won significant market share overseas. And I think your point is that could just be the way that we can solve this issue, because it's going to be the tourism sector that's going to take a long time to recover. And that was the sector that was actually absorbing some of that lower level skill. And you're quite correct, in manufacturing and in hopefully some of the other primary industries, like mining, hopefully we're going to see an upswing and we can get more jobs in that area. We are going to bring this to a conclusion. We've had so many questions coming through. The audience has been incredibly engaged, and I want to apologize that we can't even begin to get to all of your questions. My head of marketing, Mark Rosenberg, who's been in my ear through this whole panel discussion. Thanks, Mark, for all your support. Mark said that we're going to do our best to try and answer some of those questions and speak to the panel discussion attendees and maybe put together some answers. So if we didn't get your question, we will try and answer it through a written response or an article that we will release. Maybe just to finish off and to wrap up and give each of you a chance just to speak, a final view from you. So the twofold question, you decide which one you want to go for, or both. How do you see this thing playing out? Let's be practical, be honest. Do you see us coming out of lockdown, and how do you see the longer term impact? So maybe an answer, just be a little bit of a prophet, take a chance. Do we come out of lockdown at the end of the 21 days? Does it get extended? Or how do you see the next 2 or 3 months rolling out? And then maybe some sort of practical advice or something you can just give to our audience about something that you think that people need to be focused on as we roll through these next 2 to 3 months. So I'm going to start, I'm going to try and go backwards. I can't remember the exact order I took last time. I think it was first Craig. I'm going to keep you guys tight. So if I interrupt you, it's only because we're already like 12 minutes over, but you guys were just so entertaining to me, at least, that I thought we'd go over a bit, but I know you're going to need to eat dinner. So very briefly, Craig, and then we'll run through. I'll just go through each of you.
Yeah, look, I think in the interest of people's health, it's probably going to be a longer lockdown in some form or other, and maybe a slow returning to full operation, because you just got to make sure people are safe in getting to and from work. And I think there are a lot of practical things that have to be looked at and making sure that happens. There's no point locking down and then unlocking, irresponsibly, and you end up like what happened in India, where suddenly everyone's on the road. It's chaos, and whatever few people are still sick, then cause a problem for the rest of the community. So I think it's going to have to be handled responsibly. I think it's a very difficult decision for government there. I think they're balancing this business and health. Yeah, and I think I think personally, just to encourage every single person to look after yourself, look after your heart and your psychology, because it's very easy to let fear kind of run rampant. And this is a time to have friends around you, talk to people, don't go it alone. Pick up a call if you're feeling really down. Look out for people in your teams and in your communities that maybe are looking a little bit, depressed and not feeling up to it. And let's support one another at an emotional level over this time.
Thanks, Craig. Let's go to Henlo.
Yeah, I think just the one thing that I found that's been beneficial for us is we developed a sort of a map of our business, where all the pinpoints are, so we can focus. Because I think if you are just having conversations, and even if it's just following a normal just Word document bullet points, I think it starts getting a bit scattered. So what we really did was put all the fundamental points in our business. When I talk about the safety aspects, the profits, the people, the all of those elements, and then you can clearly go through them to get a delivery out of it. So I think that's one thing that we've done well, I think, as an organization. The executive team and the support management have all come together in this time. And yeah, I think that's just really what I found amazing in this. And then just one of the things that was mentioned earlier by Rob was the collaboration. I think in the sense of our business for the last 5 years, it's been a bit of a ham and a sandwich where, you're getting supplier pressure and you're getting client pressure, just constantly pushing on both ends. Where I found in this 1 week switchover, it's the first time where all three parties are together on a united situation, which I think if we use that and build from that beyond this. In terms of the lockdown, yeah, my view is probably similar to what Craig, I think it's probably going to get extended till the end of April, and then maybe some sort of phased in situation where maybe the mining sector will have to come in because the economy can't sustain it, and then just some parameters around it. For us as a bigger business, South Africa is a very small element actually of our business. It's mainly cross-border, and that's got its own elements. Fortunately, their lockdown strategy is actually to contain within the environments we're operating. It's not necessarily to completely downscale. It's sort of to fence that environment for the next 3 months and say, no one in, no one out, which is actually an opportunity for us, or a blessing in this current situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dean, do you want to just come in?
Yeah, so on the lockdown, our view is definitely a phased relaxation. And we've taken a view that we don't see life returning to the new normal until around the September timeframe. So we're looking at a 6-month period. But as I say, it's phased lockdown release, sorry. And then in terms of the one thing that we have as a bit of wisdom, I mean, there's a quote that was floating around during the course of last week that I picked up on, I thought was really good. And that was that in the rush to return to normal, use this time to consider which parts of normal are worth actually rushing back to. And I think that applies to business, applies to the individual. There's many different ways of looking at that. So that would be our perspective.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I think, I don't think we're going to go back next Friday. I think there's going to be a longer stay away or lockdown. In terms of life after, I think the reality is it's not going to be a quick fix. it's going to take really, really hard work. And in a way, I'm sensing that as South Africans, we're going to have to go through a little bit of a work revolution. I'd go as far to say, let's cancel all public holidays for the next 12 months and let's work a 6-day week. And let's really try and fix this thing together. I think we have incredible leadership in terms of government. Our president, our health minister have really come to the fore. And I think the opportunity for us to really stamp our mark as an African nation, but it's going to take hard work, and it's not going to be quick fix.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. And I think those are very telling words. It's not just a short sprint at all. Delane?
Yeah, I agree with Chris, what he's just said there. Got to be a lot of hard work. And my take is do a deep audit on everything that you've got, your skills, your funds, your emotions. Then do what you can where you are with what you have. And I also think that we need to re-challenge our thinking. And lastly, pray without ceasing and seek wisdom.
Absolutely. Thanks, Delane. Rob?
Yeah, I think our view is it will be a phased release of the lockdown. I don't think we can afford to stay in lockdown, to be quite honest. I think the social impact of it is just too significant. And just go back to something that Craig said earlier in terms of a takeaway into the future is reflect on what's important in life and how we do business, how we engage as a family, how we engage with our friends. There are lots of vulnerable people close to us. Reach out to them in this time if you've got the means.
Guys, Ian, I think just dropped off. I was about to say, it's quite incredible that the technology has held out with all of us on here, but I think Ian just dropped off just towards the end. But Ian, thank you very much for your contribution to Chris and Rob and Dean and Henlo and Craig and Delane. We really appreciate your time. I know that we all are under a lot of pressure with lots of leadership requirements. So it's great to have your insights. It's been amazing. I think in summary, we are going through an unprecedented crisis. As we said at the beginning, it's something like there is no textbook for, like I think Chris said earlier. But I think from what I've heard, if I could summarize some of the messages that have come through, yes, there's this incredible human spirit. There's been a focus from the leaders on their people, which has been right, and they've responded with a great spirit. But it goes beyond just the people in your business. It's really important that we understand this collaboration, first of all, within our own ecosystems, our supply chains, and that we support them, but then further into the rest of the economy, into those who are marginalized, into the SMMEs, into the sectors that are really impacted as a result of this crisis, and that we have to have that wider, bigger picture, which sometimes isn't a hallmark of South Africans in general and South African business. But we are starting to see some of that, and it's great to see that come out of the conversation. We've also heard about the importance of the technological solutions, that maybe this is going to be the boost we needed for digital. So that's really amazing, because I think digital can do so much for this country and really move us forward in many areas where we battled. And then I think finally, just to say that I think manufacturing, I mean, that was the insight that we got from Delane, is that maybe this is the boost for sectors that actually are going to be important for employment. And I've just seen you come on, Ian. You want to give your final remarks in terms of what you think about the lockdown and anything practical to leave the audience with?
Sure. I'll keep it short. Apologies, I lost connection there. Look, my personal view is that we probably will see out the 21 days and probably extend a little bit. I mean, if we look at what's happened internationally, we hope for 21 days, but highly unlikely. And I think businesses should be prudent and plan for longer than 21 days. And then just as a general takeout, I think we've kind of summarized it all, and you might have mentioned it already, is really just that focus on people and the connection to make sure that your business is still, if you're driving the people and you're taking care of your people, I think the business side of it will follow from that on. So just don't lose focus in your rush to get back to business as usual, the people connection as part of your business.
Thanks very much, Ian. And again, thank you to all of the panelists for coming on, giving of their time. Thank you for all the listeners that have stuck with us for an hour and 20 minutes. We hope it's been of value and it's been authentic, and we've just shared where we are in this journey. I think that we may look back on some of the things we said today and said, oh, how much we didn't know, because so much is still going to change. thank you very much. We appreciate all your time, and yeah, all the best for tonight and for the months that lie ahead. God bless and keep well.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Matt.
everybody.
Yeah, Matt, thanks.